Hello everyone, welcome to one of my videos. I'm Ribbert and this is one of my builds, or actually it's one of my guides. It's the first guide I'm doing ever. It's gonna be a network add-on mod guide to fractional angles. I'm not gonna cover all the fractional angles, just the um, FAR-3 ones. Um, The shorthand for fractional angles, as you might be able to see here, is FAR, which I pronounce as FAR. And fractionally angled 3 roads are the ones that have the most versatility when you drag them. And they are also a bit more tricky than the fractionally angled 2 roads, because there's a bit more specific ways you have to drag them. And in the end, I'm gonna show off a bit of how you make all these puzzle pieces come together, but not really all the puzzle pieces. I'm just gonna try to make it a bit more insightful on how you build these. So as you can see here, straight into a fractionally angled road transition, you can start off with a 3, 4, 5 or whatever, but the key is that you make those two bits stay disconnected from the other bit, and then just start dragging with an overlap of 3 the fractionally angled road. I'm sorry, I'm going a bit too slow in speaking, but I might just do another take after this. Here, another transition from straight into fractionally angled road. I started off with a 5 with a 6 next to it, and then just clicked the 5 to make a transition to a fractionally angled road. I counted out that I needed a 2 and a 3 there, going down, and then you need at least a 4, and then it will transition into a nice curve. Now you could have dragged the 2 and the 3 horizontally, and I'm gonna demonstrate that here, how that would look. So I'll start with a 5 again, start going on with a 6. So this is exactly the same, but where I drag the ones vertically, more vertically, because everything is angled, I guess. I'm now gonna show off what happens if you drag them horizontally, because you get a slightly different result. And as you can see here, I don't know why it does that. I think it transitions into a diagonal, but I'm not exactly sure. There's an easier way to make a diagonal transition, which I'm gonna show off later. So you have to drag them vertically, not horizontally. Now here I thought it would be smart to show off the different pieces that you have to drag, but that already gets quite complicated once you're starting to do the next bit that I built. So I actually stopped doing that. I could have cut this out, but it's gonna show up later in the video anyway, so I thought I might as well explain what I tried to do here. And the thing I did wrong here is I show it off by going horizontally when it should have been vertically, as I just explained. So don't follow the green bits. I'll put a link in the description with an overview of all the bits and the right way to drag them. I'll also put a link to a guide that actually shows the following order of the way to drag them. But you can just pause the video or slow it down if you just want to use this video to see how to make these pieces. Yeah, that third piece was a pretty basic piece. And now I'll show one with a rail going across. The downside of draggable fractionally angled roads is that the rail crossing looks a bit yeah, it doesn't look as good as the one that you can plop down. Yeah, I'm just showing off how you align these, but I'm gonna make that a bit more insightful. And there's only actually one texture for the rail crossing, which means that it only aligns once every 3 tiles. And I'm gonna try to make that more insightful here. So there's these little triangular bits as this one and that one, and the rail has to go in between those. Now, not all pieces work like this, but a couple of them do. So I'll just try to make it insightful by using the blue to indicate that there's a little triangle bit. I'm gonna call that an end bit because it's the end of a 6-piece of fractionally angled dragged roads. So in between the end bits it works fine, but the other ones don't work for rail crossings. The downside of doing dragged rail crossings like this is that there's no signals near the crossing, and there's not a little bit of concrete that indicates a pedestrian crossing, I guess. No, it doesn't. Yeah. So it looks a bit bold, I guess. I don't know what to call it. It just doesn't look as nice as the plopped one, but I guess I'm pretty sure you could just plop the ploppable one. There's also a slight difference in texture color between ploppables and draggables, so I guess you just have to accept that there isn't any signals, and maybe you can find some ploppable signals that look nice. Here I'm doing a fractionally angled transition into a diagonal, and I'm just counting out the pieces, and I'm first gonna derp around to show how it's a bit tricky to get this one going. So I counted out 3 pieces and I started dragging the diagonal from there. I tried dragging it from the other side, and it all just doesn't work. Maybe it works if you place it down, but I don't think so actually. So if you do it with the 2, it actually works. So how do you make this line up? Well, once you're dragging fractionally angled roads, you're dragging pieces of 6. If the last piece you drag is a 5, and then you just put those 2 near the end of that 5 piece and then drag a diagonal onto it, that makes it transition like that. Here I'm gonna do fractionally angled into a straight road crossing, and I'm gonna be looking at the end bits and see that the crossing part is in between 2 end bits. So I'm gonna start by showing off that one first, and then I'm gonna see if the other ones would work as well. So this is on an end bit, which is not in between, which means that it's a different texture that is required to draw those. And the third one that I put down is actually a rotation of the second one. So as you can see, they made 2 textures for the crossings with roads, while they only made 1 for the rails. And well, there's already like a couple thousand textures in these fractional angled roads puzzle pieces, so I think we shouldn't complain too much about having one less texture for the rails, and I think it's better to just work around the limitations that we have rather than complain about them. Now, as you can see here, there's a difference between the pieces that are plopped down and the pieces that are dragged, and what you can see is that there's no pavement forming around the plopped pieces, while the dragged ones, or the dragged ones, I'll just call it dragged. If it's wrong, I guess I'm wrong sometimes. They do have pavement. This indicates, I believe, that you can't zone on the plopped pieces, but you can zone on the dragged pieces, and that's a big advantage for dragged fractionally angled roads versus plopped ones. of course, there's the advantage that you don't have to scroll through puzzle pieces all the time and can just use like 3 menu buttons instead of 1 menu buttons and 1 million scrolls before you can make a nice little bit of a network. And once you get a feel for the puzzle pieces, it actually becomes quite easy to drag the fractionally angled roads. But it takes a bit of practicing and a bit of experimenting before you find a couple of structures and techniques that are reliable and predictable, I guess. So that's a difference. You can zone on the dragged fractionally angled roads, which is a big advantage, and I think the pavement, you might not be too enthusiastic about the pavement that I'm using here, but you can use any pavement mod that you want, and I think the pavement can look nice when you want it. And having the option for pavement is always better than not having the option. Now here, as you can see, there's 3 textures for T intersection because it lines up on 3 different pieces. It lines up where the triangle is in the direction and in the opposite direction, and it lines up on the regular piece that's the same as the ploppable part. So you also have more pieces when you drag fractionally angled roads. It's not just an advantage in terms of zoning, in terms of the pavement, in terms of ease of use. It's also an advantage in that you have a couple of extra pieces for some of the intersections, but actually not for all of them. Now here I'm gonna start. I just copy the alignment from the from the example that I'm using from the ploppable fractionally angled roads, and as you can see, this is the way you line that one up. But I'm gonna do some experimenting and see if it always lines up. So I started with a 2, now I'm gonna do a 3 and that lines up. And now I'm just gonna repeat the 3 again because I derped out. And doing a 3 is the same starting with a 6. And then putting a 3 near it at the bottom. And now I'm gonna think. So I did a 2 and a 3. What is the next step? Well, the next step is actually a 1, which means that you have to do a 4. So it's 4 and 1 at the same time because the 1 overlaps completely with the road. So you don't have to put that down, which means you can just start with a 4. And there we go. So it actually has, for each alignment, it has 3 textures for the intersections. So when you start thinking about it, that's a lot of extra textures, which is very nice if you just want to do some straight and fractionally angled roads interactions. You have a lot more options than when you're doing a completely fractionally angled road network, as I'm gonna be demonstrating later. Now here you can see I'm making a bunch of space, and you might think, well, that's a lot of space, but it's actually not that much space, and I'm gonna need a bit more later on. I'm gonna be demonstrating how to drag crossings for fractionally angled road intersections. At first, I just want to indicate the endpoints, and I derped out because that's not an endpoint. So I made sure that I fixed that. And by endpoint, I mean those little triangles that are at the end of a 6-piece that you're dragging. They're on both ends of the 6-piece that you're dragging. They just rotated, one side is rotated 180 degrees from the other side. Okay, so here I indicated where I can start because I, like with the rail crossings, these can only be, you can only start these in between the endpoints. So a way to start these is by dragging a 5 across, and as you can see, this is, well, you can't see it now because I didn't click it, but that would have transitioned into a T intersection. And then, so instead of dragging the 5, you could have gone one tile over and just dragged the 6, but I just wanted to indicate the distancing from the road that you're using. So this is a 5 distance from the far side of the crossing. So that's a 6 in the end because I extended it by 1 bit. And this is the rotated version of the other one that I built. There's actually only one texture for these crossings, and I'm gonna try to indicate it by plopping down some zoning and showing the different shapes that are on each side of the crossing. And there's a couple interesting facts about these shapes. At first I need to extend the roads to actually give a more clear indication of the shapes. But you might want to pause the video at some point. But if you look at this long enough, I hope that you notice that each side actually, I'm looking at the gaps in between the roads, and each side is completely different from any other side. So the gaps are all different, and this means that the alignment of the roads from a cross intersection is different in each direction. I don't know how useful that information is, but yeah, I think it indicates something about how the alignment transitions from one direction into the next. But it kind of means that intersections are finicky, I guess. I'm not sure what you can actually take from this, but what it does mean in the end is that there's only one intersection texture, and that every intersection that you make is either, yeah, it's just one of the 4 rotations of the same intersection texture. So I showed off 2 rotations over there. I'm just gonna show off the other 2 rotations. I kinda wish I could have a more comprehensive explanation about how this alignment stuff works. But I think once you know the limitations of the alignment, okay, this is the other way of dragging a cross intersection. You start with a 6 instead of a 5, which means you don't have to put a single piece on the other side, and you have to keep dragging with an overlap of 3. And this is the other way the intersection can be put down. Now I'm gonna do another one, but I thought, well, let's keep a little bit of extra space there. Yeah, so there's 4 ways of putting down an intersection, and I think knowing each way of putting those down can already be of a big help when you're looking to align a couple of roads and are having trouble, because if you know each version of an intersection, then the chance of you actually working out a good way to align them is a bit bigger. Yeah, and here I'm just indicating that the 2 last ones that I put down are both a 90-degree version of the other one. Yeah, I'm gonna make it a bit more insightful by coloring in the same side on each part. But it's a bit hard to explain these kind of things because there's a bit of, I don't know, that it's not really a third dimension of thinking or something, but the alignment is a bit unpredictable because there's so many versions of alignments, and then there's the road that you're intersecting with that has so many different types of alignments. So it's a bit overwhelming for your brain, at least for my brain, and I hope I'm not the only one who's having a bit of trouble with this. Well, I kinda hope you all don't have trouble with this, but if you do, I hope this makes it a bit more clear. Now, as you can see here, these are just the 4 different rotations, and if you want to know how I put these down, I think you should just slow down the video and look over that bit again, because I'll put a link to a guide in the description, but that doesn't show each direction that you can put them down, and it just shows one, and it's kind of hard from that. At least it took me a long time before I realized every way that you could put the intersection down. So I think using this video is probably the easiest way to learn. Okay, here I'm gonna be showing off the next puzzle piece, which is the T intersections. And the way you drag a T intersection is you do it the same as with the crossroads. You start at one of those in between the endpoints bit and endpoints bits, because there's multiple bits, and you start this with a 5, so that's the same as the first 2 cross intersections that I put down. And the thing with these is you can't start them with a 6 because then they derp out. I'm not sure if I end up showing that off by accident, but for now I just wanted to show off how you do put them down. So there's 2 ways. You could start with a fractionally angled road and T off of that, and you can also start with a 5 endpoint of a fractionally angled road and put 2 6s across it. I'm going to show the other variations of these. So this is, it's all the same T intersection with its 4 rotations, and there's only one texture for each alignment, but there's 2 alignments because right now it's going, I guess, northeast, and you could also make it go practically north like this one, and T of one of those. So as you can see, I started with a 5. Now here I have one 5 endpoint, 5 long endpoint, and I just drag these 2 6s. The only way, by the way, you can build these T and cross intersections is by making them perpendicular. So you can't really mix the stuff that's on the left hand side with the right hand side without transitioning into either diagonals or straight bits first. So yeah, here I'm just putting down some straight roads to give a bit more of a feel, because I felt that it was a bit disorienting the way all these fractionally angled roads look together, especially since the perspective made the left part look very straight, which made the right part in return look like a weird kind of diagonal angle, but it's definitely not an actual diagonal angle. But these are all the puzzle pieces that we have, and the many alignment, well, the many directions that they can be built in. But yeah, the way these things line up is actually quite finicky. And this next bit is just me building some stuff to show off how finicky it can be, and to show off a couple of ways that you can bypass the finickiness. Now, at first, if you're gonna look to make a fractionally angled grid, just a basic grid, the first step you want to do is build the outside roads. So let's just imagine that this is one of the outside roads, and I'm just building this road to find a good alignment for the second outside road. So you find two outside roads. You can only have two outside roads, I think, but well, I might be wrong, alright. I'm just sharing what I think I know, but I might be wrong, so you just experiment for yourself. But a good way to do it, I think, is to make two outside roads and just do a bunch of T intersections in between those. And you might even do a couple of cross intersections, but yeah, so like this. The main upsides of doing a build like this is it looks like a grid for those of you who like grids, and it's predictable, and it has a pretty good amount of flexibility in terms of how wide you want your zoning areas to be, and you can make any of these T intersections into a cross intersection. Now let's say that I had some random road that ends up with a different type of cross intersection here, and I'm just doing this to demonstrate how random roads line up or actually don't line up into nice intersections. Or well, you could go with that first piece and think, well, that's fine, that's good enough, and I don't mind. I think it's alright to make concessions when you're doing something as difficult as this and as unpredictable as this. But when I try to build fractionally angled roads, I would like to have them all fractionally angled. And as you can see there, that intersection just derped out completely. So that means that there's a certain limitation between making it look nice and the way things align with each other. And yeah, I'm sorry, I can't make it completely insightful without, well, I just don't have it completely insightful for myself. So I think there's just a couple of tricks and a couple of ideas that you can use, but in the end you just have to practice for yourself. So now um, I tried a different type of um, experiment, and I started with a T on one of the crossroads, or one of the roads that goes across. Now that doesn't align in a T intersection because it ends with a 6 length piece, which means that it doesn't have a texture for it. But that also means that you can make it into a cross intersection. And from this one, I'm gonna try to make a road that goes into the original side road. And you can make a cross intersection, as you can see, but the T intersection wouldn't work. And there's a certain logic to this that it's kind of hard to put it into words, so I suggest that you just try a bunch of different things until you get a certain feeling for it. And I do have a certain set of ideas in my head, but I don't understand them well enough in order to put them into words. So, but over here I'm gonna demonstrate a different way of building a grid-like structure. It's not really a grid, but it's a certain texture that you can create. And there's a couple of different versions of this texture that depend on how you start this first bit. But as you can see here, I built a square, and I did this by rotating the T intersections into a clockwise direction. I could have done this anti-clockwise, and that would have meant that the gap in the middle here would have had a different shape because everything would have aligned slightly differently. but I did it like this for now, and I'm gonna demonstrate how you can make an interesting pattern with this. So you start off with a clockwise one, and what this means is that the other side of each T intersection has to result in an anti-clockwise square. So you have to alternate the clockwise and anti-clockwise squares, which is an indication for the type of T intersections that you have to drag. So I need, well, at first you can look at each side of that T intersection there, and the right side has to be a clockwise one, and the left side an anti-clockwise one. Now I'm first going to build the right side because I wanted to make a pattern with those squares, with a series of those squares that I started with. So I just do the T intersection thing, and because this has to be in a cross T intersection, I decided to, I had to build two sixes and just delete the end bit there. So as you can see, there's another square with clockwise cross T intersections. Now the two bits in between, I'm just going to demonstrate one of them now, but it has to have an anti-clockwise alignment, which means that there needs to be a cross T over there, so I have to end with a 5 going into two sixes. But the alignment is a bit weird there, and you could just use that, and that's fine. But I decided to show off the other way you could use it. So I'm ending with a 5 one piece further. It's quite limited in the spacings that you can use because the T intersections always have to go in an I tried to explain that earlier, but they're very specific in where they can end. But this is a certain type of pattern that you could use, and yeah, I hope it's a bit clear. But on every side of, you'd have to start making more squares. Well, you don't have to make squares, alright? I'm doing squares here because I like squares, I guess. But you could just make some rectangles and use those, and I think rectangles would actually be more space efficient. But you could make a little bit of a pattern, a little bit of a grid like this, and you could even, there's a lot of things you could do with when you're starting with something like this. You could do a part where you just transition into some diagonals, or you could transition into some straight roads and then back into this fractional angled grid. There's a lot of things that you can experiment with, but something like this you could just copy paste it. Well, it's not as easy as copy paste because you have to build it by hand, but just experiment with this stuff. I hope all this has been a bit clear on how you can use the cross and the T intersections, and I hope it's at least a bit inspirational and giving you ideas for how to practice and how to experiment with this. And now I'm gonna end up by showing my region for a little bit. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you again. Goodbye.